You're listening to Funny Peculiar with Jeff Downs.
Welcome to another special edition of Funny Peculiar Podcast coming from the Edinburgh Fringe Festival 2018. Small footnote, if you are listening after August 2018, don't bother going to Edinburgh. There's no shows, there's nothing there. This was recorded during the festival. I was up there for a few days doing a few gigs and also recording interviews for the podcast and some great acts I've got coming up. But this week I have Dominic Frisby, who was a character comedian that I remember from the circuit in London, who was a brilliant comic, did lots of different characters. He also did voiceover work. He's an actor, stand-up, author, and his second book is all about bitcoins, and we talk about that in the interview. And Dominic did this interview straight after his show, or more or less straight after his show, so I'm very grateful for his time. And I saw it. Go and see it. It's at the Gilded Balloon, 5 o'clock at TV at House every day, and you can win £500 cash. So, but listen, if you want to catch up with Dominic, you can follow him on social media. So it's Facebook, it's just Dominic Frisby, and Twitter is the same, Dominic Frisby, and he has a website, dominicfrisby.com. So there we go. I think that's it. There's a little bit of noise in the background. Hopefully, I think the quality is good. You can hear the interview. It was, as I said, it was done at the Gilded Balloon straight after. So anyway, take it away, and I give you the brilliant, the marvellous, the very funny Dominic Frisby. Welcome to an Edinburgh special of Funny Peculiar Podcast, and over the few days I've been up here, I'm trying to get all sorts of acts for the podcast, and you've seen my list of guests that I have, but I've found today one of the great character comedians that I remember from the circuit when I started out doing character comedy, and it's Dominic Frisby. Hello, Dominic.
Hi there, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for coming on today's show.
Just
talk us through the sort of format of the show that you're presenting today.
Well, it's called Dominic Frisby's Financial Game Show, and I've since about the mid-noughties I've been very interested in finance and economics and all that kind of thing. But at the same time, I've always thought I was a very good and under-recognised compere. And so this is the kind of show that marries my under-recognised compering skills with my sort of fascination with amazing statistics. And also I'm very lucky because I wrote the first book about Bitcoin. This is wearing my non-comedy hat. So I've got quite a few contacts in the kind of financial world. And Bitcoin Cash, which is a company involved in Bitcoin, basically, gave me some money they basically sponsored the show. So I actually have £500 in cash to give out to the winner of every show. So that's quite a sort of incentive. And on top of that, I've got some Bitcoin Cash, and I've got some silver, and I've got Money Week subscriptions. So it's a game show. I think you described it very well. You called it a highbrow game show. But it's sort of QI, but with prizes.
It's QI meets play your cards right, basically.
That's exactly what it is, but with prizes. And I think, like I do, as you said, play your cards, I do higher, lower, but with house prices and people's net worth and average salaries and things like that. So particularly the house prices one is very telling when you see the unequal distribution of wealth on a geographical basis around the UK. When like a house in Burnley, like everyone laughs when I show a flat in Springburn, which is the roughest bit of Glasgow, and a flat in Springburn is 28 grand, but a house in Burnley is 20 grand. A whole house is less than a one-bed flat in one of the roughest bits of Glasgow.
I saw you earlier, and when you did that part, and to explain to people, Dominic, a bit like play cards, he's folding over and showing property values. People, I could hear the audience going, fuck. Yeah. People, as you say, it is a national obsession, house prices, because how everybody's mortgaged up to the hilt, aren't they? Or I think in Europe it's less concerning about mortgages. They're more into rental, aren't they?
Well, yeah, the Germans rent, and it's culturally more acceptable to rent, and also, like in England, I mean, we're going up a side alley, but we have short-term tenancies here, which the rights of the tenant on the continent are much stronger, and so that's created more of a renting culture. Whereas here, basically, low interest rates and inflation, all the money that got printed during the Blair and Brown era just went into the housing market. And, it's ridiculous. You could literally buy a house in 1995, shit all over the walls, murder 20 people, leave their bodies under the floorboards, and it would still triple in value within 10 years. It was insane.
It was great. But this is something we'll get onto later, and you've And yes, now you've written, and let's just give a little bit, I'm going to just sort of tell everybody. Now, I've known you as a character comedian from years ago when I was on the London circuit, and you did a few characters, the upper class rapper, which I think was the first one I saw, which was brilliant, which was so well chosen. There was Ludvig the Bavarian, and there was Maurice the Morris Dancer, who was another particular favourite of mine. So, and I was starting out in the character comedy road. And also, you've written two, but as we've just mentioned, the Bitcoin one, the future of money, and you do voiceovers as well, and you do stand up as well. I think you do everything basically. So,
yeah, well, it's I've got quite a lot of boredom threshold. I think I've got so much a low boredom threshold as if I don't get very successful at something very quickly, I get frustrated. So I lack the requisite staying power. So I think if I was on Come Dancing or something, I'd be one of the people that ranked quite highly, quite well, quite quickly, and then didn't get much further. I seem to remember Sherry Lungi was quite good at an early stage, and then didn't really progress, didn't get any better. But yeah, I mean, I went to drama school. I started out as an actor.
I was going to say, if we can go back, so you started out at drama school. What did you do? And you've always been in acting or drama. There was no other.
I went to university, and I did drama and Italian at university because I got Italian great grandparents, and I sort of wanted to learn Italian, for them. And then I did drama at Manchester, and I was on the course with Paul Tonkinson, who was another. And so I actually saw Paul's first ever gig. It was in a thing called Studio Group when he was about 18. And I never did my first gig until 10 years later. And anyway, after university I went to drama school, but I went to drama school because I wanted to become a writer. I was determined to become a writer. And I'd looked at all the best writers from, William Shakespeare through to whoever, and most of them had started out as actors. Even Shakespeare started out as an actor. So I thought the best way to train to be a writer is to start out as an actor. So that was my plan. And then when I was at drama school, I found I was top in radio. I was always the best in the class in radio.
In radio production or doing radio plays?
Doing acting in plays. Okay, I was always used to get. I always used to get mediocre feedback unless we were doing comedy. But radio, I was always be top in the class. And so I made a voice tape, and then I sent a voice tape out to the voiceover agents when I left drama school. And one of them signed me up, and within a week, I got the job, and I was the voice of ATP Tennis on Channel 4. Me and Andrew Carson. It was a year's contract, and I was paid £300 every Thursday evening. Every Tuesday evening, I'd have to go and record the programme. And, it was good money in those days, and it was like, wow. And all my other friends were unemployed actors, and I was earning good money, and voiceovers just worked for me straight away.
What year roughly are we talking?
This was 1993.
93. And how difficult, and you think some commentating on doing voiceovers, is it quite difficult, or once you get it, it's easy?
I mean, you get better at it, but I do think there's lots of actors who I think are rotten voiceovers, and there's lots of voiceovers who are rotten actors.
Okay.
But there is a lot of crossover. There's some voiceovers who are brilliant actors. Michael Gambon, fantastic voiceover. John Hurt, fantastic voiceover. But then you've got Idris Elba. He's terrible. He's brilliant actor. He's terrible voiceover. But everyone gets Idris Elba in to do voiceovers because it's Idris Elba and they want to meet Idris Elba. But he's actually, if you listen to him vocally, he's got no range. He stresses the wrong words. He's got awful inflection. And so not all being a good actor does not qualify you as being a good voiceover.
So you were doing this for £300 on a Thursday, and this kind of, you launched yourself a bit, and it gave you.
It was just good money, and I was about 23 at the time or something, and you'd go into Soho, you'd record a voiceover in a studio, you'd be treated like royalty. You'd go into the foyer of the studio while you're waiting for your job, and there'd be Michael Caine or someone would be on the side of the. It's just wow, this is good. And then you'd go and do some shitty fringe production of some play somewhere, and it was just awful. And you'd go, why am I bothering? And you'd go and do some audition to be in something, and there'd be some arsehole deciding whether to give you a part in the play. And you just thought, I don't want to submit myself to the decision making of somebody I've got absolutely no respect for. Whereas voiceovers, you never had to go through that humiliation because you had a voice tape, and they listened to the voice tape and they either liked you or you didn't.
Right.
So it's a good lifestyle, but it's a dangerous lifestyle. Right. Because you can be quite successful quite quickly, and you get caught in a money trap because it's well paid, Anyway, this was about 96 now, 1996, 1997. I wrote a song called The Upper Class Rat, which I tried to get released as a Christmas novelty single.
Okay. And how did that come about? Why did you suddenly go, I'm going to write
because I got pissed off with, in the 90s, he was very much in the sort of post-alternative comedy Ben Elton era, and I got pissed off with all the shit. I'm from London. I wouldn't qualify myself as like really posh. I'm not kind of Eton posh or anything like that. But you know, my mother used to say we're upper middle class.
Right. Okay.
So you know, I had an educated background, but I went to University of Manchester, and I just used to be given shit all the time for being a southerner and being well spoken. I thought, oh, fuck off. But anyway, I used to be given shit, and it wasn't my fault that I'm how I am. And then there was all this thing with hip hop and like and I just thought it'd be really funny to sort of undermine. And also I loved Woodhouse and I loved Noel Coward and all that kind of witty rhyme and all that. And I just thought it'd be funny to sort of undermine the pomposity of hip hop by being a posh guy doing it. And so I tried to do it as a Christmas novelty single. And I was at university with a guy called Alex Hardee, who had become the manager of the Scissor Sisters. Do you remember the Scissor Sisters?
I do, yeah, you're right. Okay.
And so I phoned up Alex. I said, I've written this single, Alex. I want to get it released as a single. Yeah. And he said, oh, go and do it in my brother's club. And Alex Hardee's brother, unbeknown to me, was Malcolm Hardee, the great legend that was Malcolm Hardee, who ran out the creek.
So Malcolm Hardee was a legend on the London circuit, wasn't he?
Yeah, Malcolm Hardee was like much bigger legend than his brother Alex. He was like, he ran a club called the Tunnel Club. He like stole Freddie Mercury's birthday cake. It was a great subversive, totally unoriginal material, but just used to do the most anarchic things. And he used to do an act called the Great Balloon Dance, and they'd all stand on stage naked.
Was that the Oddballs they were called? They did it on Tiz didn't they?
Possibly.
And I think that's where he comes from, because I do remember, I think Tiz they definitely appeared doing the balloon dance.
Oh, okay.
There was a few.
But were they naked?
Yeah.
And then every time they'd change the balloon, and they would just change the balloon in time so that nobody wouldn't see anyone's part.
And it was
called The Greatest Show on Legs, is what it was called.
Right, yes, yeah. So,
anyway,
go on, yeah.
And I went along. It was a Sunday evening, and I remember Malcolm compared it. Malcolm was a terrible compere, and I can't even remember who was on first. I've not seen him before or since. He was sort of all right. Gina Yashere was on second.
Okay, yeah.
And you know, she was a good act, but she's a very good act. But by the break, it just wasn't really happening the night, and it was just quite subdued, and you could just feel this sort of brewing tension in the room. And the open spots all used to go on after the break. But I didn't know this. Sunday night up the creek was legend. You would go there and heckle the open spots and make the open spots life a misery, and then that was what you would do. And I had no idea about this. And the first open spot was a guy called Hovis Presley, who's now no longer with us. And he used to do poems in this kind of Lancashire accent, very lyrical poems. And he also did one-liners, really funny. One of his lines I remember was, my mate's got a dog called Nigel. Talk about giving a dog a bad name. But said in this really lyrical Lancastrian accent. It's very funny. Anyway, now Hovis knew what he was doing. But this is Greenwich, South East London, Deptford, and in those days London was much more tribal than it is now. Now London's kind of just been diluted. There's no kind of identity for bits of London anymore. But if there is an identity, it's in the South East. And you know, they just weren't having some northern, don't like northerners. You know, they weren't having that in their club. And he was doing these lines, and I remember watching these lines and going, this guy's funny. But they were just booing him and heckling him and calling for Malcolm. But Hovis just stood his ground. He was like, I'm not letting them get the better of me. So he did his 10 minutes, and he did his poems, and he did his lines. And they were going, Malcolm, get this bloke! You know, and all this was going on. It was utter mayhem by the time Malcolm came back on stage. And then Malcolm literally came back on and said, oh, that was shit. Well, anyway, the next act, he's a mate of me brothers, he's never done it before, his name's Fraz, here he is. And I walked in, and I borrowed, my flatmate at the time was a solicitor, and I borrowed his pinstripe suit. And I had a double-breasted pinstripe suit, and I walked on, and I was in character, and I went, hello, and they were just like, who's this? Malcolm! And the whole room was just heckling me to shit. But, you know, I had rehearsed. It was all in rhyme, and it was to music, and I'd rehearsed it a million times, and I just literally just did it, all I did was just did. It was a 5-minute song, all in rhyme.
And this was
a
your
rap.
first gig?
This was my first ever gig, and I did it. And he put the music on, and I just did it, and they just started laughing.
Right.
Thank God. And this posh guy subverting hip hop by doing things. By the way, posh guys doing hip hop has become a massive thing. About 10 years later, there's a guy called the Gentleman Rhymer and various others. But this was like 10 years before that. Anyway, so it went well and had a good gig. And then Malcolm's wife Jane, who ran the club, in those days, if you had an open spot and it went well, they gave you a booking. That was the policy. And Jane said to me, well, this is your first ever gig. It might have just been a fluke. Right. I can't give you a 20-minute booking on the back of this, but I will give you a 10-minute spot next week. We'll give you a half spot. Right. So I came along the following Friday, and I had a half spot on a Friday night, and the gig went very well. Yeah. I got paid 50 quid. Wow. I went up to the room upstairs and I smoked weed with Simon Munnery, who was Alan Parker, Urban Warrior, and Simon Day off The Far Show. Yeah. And I was like, wow, it's Simon Day off The Far Show and it's Simon Munnery. And then I went downstairs and a girl just went for me, and I went back with this girl. So in my second night of doing comedy, I got paid 50 quid in cash, smoked weed with 2 stars off the telly, and copped off with someone. I'm like, this is the fucking life. This is it. This is it.
You've arrived.
Yeah.
So it's like, and was there any point of this gig that you were going to go, I can't do this, I'm not going to see it through, or what?
No, because it was all in rhyme,
and so
and it was to a musical beat. So literally, it was an exercise in recitation.
Yeah, right.
It wasn't an exercise in comedy. And in the long term, it actually got me into trouble because I did this act and I just increased the rap, and by the end of it, it was like at its sort of zenith, the rap went on for about 25 minutes, all to the same beat. And the problem is that because it was a musical acts tend to get a big response from the audience. But because it was all in rhyme, I would write the jokes in rhyme, but I never actually progressed. Like, if the audience didn't like the act, I had nowhere else to go. Yeah. I could only do the act. So, even though I got used to standing on stage and stuff like that, I didn't actually progress as a comedian. I never learned to work the audience. I never learned to try different jokes, to banter, or any of those things. And what ended up happening is I got promoted very quickly to doing 20s, but because I was usually the junior act on the bill, I'd be put on first, and the act would die on its arse every time I went on first. So I found I made loads of progress, and then I stopped making progress because the act kept dying, and then people go, no, you're shit, you just died. I mean, when I went on first doing the upper class round, it stank the room out.
But this is interesting with character comedy, and I find doing it as well, that you should never put a character act on first because the audience are never ready for that. You only put, and I was speaking to Graham Fellows, who does John Shuttleworth, and I saw him at a gig up in the north, and I got to speak to him, and I just said, you must have headlined as John Shuttleworth. He said, I never headlined. I can't believe it. He never headlined because he was so bespoke, and a lot of promoters wouldn't risk that. Were you finding that for character comedy, promoters wouldn't risk you on a headlining role, or it didn't affect you in that way, or did you start to wonder, I've got to go in the middle because it's the only way I can survive?
Well, as long as I was on in the middle, I'd have a good gig. And if I got put on in the middle, often it would go so well. I found myself in this situation where some clubs had me headlining, some clubs had me on in the middle, but anywhere I'd been on first wouldn't book me again.
Right, and it goes again.
So I was caught in this weird rut, and but even if I did like an hour of character comedy at the Edinburgh Fringe, if I went on first and did the upper class rap at the beginning of that show, it would still die. The act did not work going on first.
What did you do in that? Would you just appear as yourself and do a little bit of stand-up?
Well, no. I couldn't appear as myself because I had no act, I had no experience doing comedy. I couldn't appear as myself. So I then wrote a couple of other characters. I wrote another act called Ludvig the Bavarian, which worked better going on first. And that was very inspired by Ronnie Barker. Right. And I used to wear lederhosen, and I had played the sousaphone, and I had a thing where every time I went to blow the sousaphone, I had a sampler hidden behind the sousaphone, and funny noises would come out. Right. And then I had loads of puns, and I had a huge routine about. I remember going into the pub and asking for a pint of lager bitter, and the landlord said lager bitter, and I said yes, and he said, and he went on, the whole lager.
Yes, yeah,
and there were loads of, and I met one joke I was always very proud of, which was, your lederhosen, what is they made of? And I said, leder, and he said, no, I want to know now. So it was just stupid kind of Ronnie Barber. But then what happened with that act is that Henning came over from Germany.
Yes.
So there were real Germans suddenly came over. So that act was redundant.
Just to quickly say, Henning Wey is he's a big German comedian over here now, isn't he? He just does stand up. But yes, before he turned up, you were probably the only one doing it German.
Well, there's a guy called Mark. I can't remember his surname. Mark Blake, is it? Mark somebody used to do a German act. But anyway, and then.
But just to clarify, which is really interesting, is that Ludvig was a result of the upper class rapper it not working. So you just by default you had to come up with something.
Yeah. Well, what I should have, looking back now, what I probably should have done is written other raps and done banter in between. Right. But ultimately, the upper class rapper, the joke was, this is a posh guy rapping.
Yeah.
There was no backstory to it. Like while I was doing the act, the Conservatives got voted out of power and Tony Blair came in. So I did for about a year. I did it. I was a Tory who'd lost his job.
Right.
But really, there was no. It was just the joke was a posh guy rapping.
Yeah.
Done very well, I think.
What? Very well indeed.
But there was no. It wasn't like Al Murray or someone doing The Pub Landlord where you saw a huge backstory to this guy's character. And so Ludvig was a caricature. I've always found caricatures funny. You're not supposed to do, and then
it's accessible, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because if you go for people that do certain characters, if it's too vague, if it's not strong enough, then the audience just don't get it, and you could be staring at the what's.
I tell you what I think it is when I was growing up, I never found stand-up that funny. I never found Ben Elton or. Those guys. I always like sketches.
Yeah.
I like Not the 9 O'Clock News and Peter Sellers and that kind of thing. Always just Ronnie Barker. That's what I liked. And so I was trying to do kind of sketch acts in a stand-up scenario. So basically, my acts were like extended sketches.
Yeah.
And in one stage in Edinburgh, this would have been Edinburgh 2000. Was it 99? I can't remember. I did like a one-man sketch show.
Right.
And I still think that's probably the best Edinburgh show I've ever done, to be honest. But anyway.
And that was with the upper class rapper.
That had the upper class rapper. It had Ludvig, it had Maurice, and it had loads of other sketches.
And Maurice is the Maurice the
Morris Dancer. Well, I wrote that was another thing. Is I wrote an act called Maurice the Morris Dancer because I'd read that Morris dancing when they pull their hankies through their armpits and dangle them in front of a girl's face. I'd read that was a courting ritual, to do their pheromones, and I thought it would be very funny to have. So I used to put false teeth and an ugly beard and all this, and I thought it would be very funny to make it as repellent a character as possible and try and chat up women in the front row. And I used to do a thing where I'd get a couple up on stage and then basically win the girl from the bloke, even if they'd been together for 10 years and even if he was like Mr. Alpha Male. And of course the joke was that the audience could see that the woman wasn't attracted to me, but I couldn't see that. But it was funny, and it was Maurice the Morris Dancer, but I specifically wrote that act because Jongleurs, which was very big at the time, had like, you could do like Thursday, Friday, double on a Saturday, and a gig on Sunday, and you'd be paid like 250 quid or something, and so you'd earn like more than 1,000 quid in a week just doing Jongleurs. Jongleurs was massive.
And this is when it started off, which was about 96.
No. This was we're now in the early noughties.
Early noughties, beg your pardon.
So that when Jongleurs expanded, so there's a Jongleurs in Leeds, a Jongleurs in Birmingham, a Jongleurs, all over the country.
Yeah. And you were doing all of the Jongleurs?
Yeah, I was doing the Jongleurs, but I specifically wrote the Morris Dancer act for Jongleurs because it was like a very broad caricature of an act.
And which one was it? Maurice that worked the best? If you would do the upper class rapper, would it not go down?
It was too unreliable. The upper class rapper was too unreliable. Depending Maurice, I could go on first, I could go on in the middle, I could go on at the end, I could compare, and it was fine. It was a bulletproof act for the kind of beery environment that was Jongleurs. Again, it was a caricature as a stereotype. And then Julia,
brave to do that. As
well,
a
whatever. But I did not have. I had not done stand-up, and I personally did not have a statement that I wanted to make. I was no good at writing. I wasn't good enough at like Tim Vine. I used to like Tim Vine puns. I wasn't a good enough. I quite like telling stories, but and I also think it's because it goes back to this thing of being an upper middle class bloke from London. I don't think I had the status on stage. I just think people's first reaction was not to like me. Whereas if you come on with goofy teeth and a stupid smile, they like you. If you're an idiot, obviously.
And do you think if you're working class and you show it, suddenly there's a ground?
I think you have like a 10%, 15% edge if you have something. Like if you've got a strong accent, or a strong physical characteristic. If you're really fat, or you're really tall, or you're really short, or you're really whatever, a disability in a way. A disability in comedy, is an advantage because it gives you an edge.
Well, I think
whereas I'm a average height, average weight, averagely well spoken, I've just got nothing.
I think they say Ben Elton had to slightly London himself up.
Of course he did. That guy's parents were Oxford Dons.
He was from quite a highbrow family.
And I'm not prepared to do that. I was never prepared to lie in the way. There's loads of acts who make out there's something they're not. And I was never, and even like Welsh acts or whatever, they'll just Welsh it up a bit. And I could have. I'm a Londoner, so it's quite easy to switch into sort of down market London. And I could have made when I grew up, it was really tough, But I just was never prepared to do that.
And what was when you do Maurice? Was there a particularly bad gig where it just didn't go, or was there an example?
I'm not going to say I never had a bad gig, because I must have had a bad gig. But it was a reliable, consistent act. If I had bad gigs, it was in highbrow.
Right. Okay.
If I was in highbrow places. The upper class rapper, just like epic bad gigs.
Right, okay.
Epic. Epic, like storming gigs, you would process down the street, you'd be a hero, made a, what do they call it when you're a member of the town, what do they call it?
Give them the keys of the city.
Give them the keys of the city and all the rest of it. But I had some stinkers.
And because I get that still when you think, well, I've just done a great set, and then the next night it's just nothing. What is going through your head when you think, well, I've got to change that, I need to change that, or that's just the nature of audience?
Well, with the rapper, the solution was to just write another act.
Right, okay.
And to be fair, I was pretty productive in those days. Like I wrote Ludvig within about a year of writing the rapper. I had a good 20-minute working set as Ludvig. And then within about a year or two, I had another character I liked called Simon LaFontaine.
Right.
And who was, do you remember like Tara Palmer Tomkinson and all that It Girls?
Yeah.
So he was an It guy.
Right, okay.
And I suppose I can say this now, I was married to a woman called Louisa Hay, and her brother was David Hay, the boxer.
Oh, right, okay.
And this is before David became like a famous. Yeah. He was just a total shagger. And he just used to shag everyone, and he was really good looking, he was really masculine. And he just used to come around our house and just tell us about all what he'd been up to.
Right, okay.
And it was so funny what he said. Accidentally and deliberately and accidentally, because David's got a really ruthless streak to him and contemptuous. So I basically just used to sit there and write down everything that David said and then transcribe it into this Simon LaFontaine It guy who would regale the audience with tales of the women he'd fucked and all the rest of it. But basically it was just David Hay transcribed. But it went very well. It was a good act for a while. And Alan Bloom used to come up to me and go, "That's the best thing you've ever done." And I go, "It's just David Hay. I just transcribed David Hay."
And did Simon involve it? Did you then want to take your character in down?
Well, we got there were pilots. Pilot never got made, but there were bits were filmed and people talked about it. But just coming back, it was one of this usual story with comedians in telly. It just never, it was nearly, but not quite. But then Julia, who ran Jongleurs,
and
she was the booker at Jongleurs.
Yeah,
she hated character acting.
She did,
and she used to say to me, "That Morris Dancer you do is awful."
But she booked you.
No, she then stopped booking me. So I wrote the Morris Dancer specifically to do Jongleurs, and then Julia took charge of the booking. She refused to book me. No. And I'm friends with Julia, and I always have been. She knew me. She was honest enough with me. It's awful. And it's not awful.
It works.
Yeah. But anyway, so she refused to book me. So I got so frustrated with it all with just the lack of progress, that in the end I stopped doing characters altogether and just compared.
Right, okay.
And
as yourself?
Yeah, as myself. And I actually did a show, this was 2003, I did a show called Truth and Bullshit. And half the show, the bullshit half of the show was the idea, it was Maurice the Morris Dancer, talking about farming stuff. And the truth thing was that Frank Skinner had written his autobiography, and he said he didn't like character comics, he liked comics because he wanted to leave with a piece, he wanted to get to know that person and leave with a piece of them, and that's why he liked it. So I then extended that, and I went round my house with a camera and then took pictures and did slides where I just told the audience loads of unnecessary details about my personal life. So it was like truth dialed up to the thing. And that was that show, and that sort of got me started doing, and I had a nightmare doing that show. I was over at the Pleasance Courtyard, and I ended up getting divorced during the middle of the run. Bloody nightmare. But anyway, this is 2003, but from there I just started doing straight stand-up, and I just focused on comparing because it was a way to get work.
Right, okay.
And so since then, since early on, I occasionally go back. Every now and then I'll get somebody like you will remember the characters I did, or somebody, like every now and then I get an email going, will you do Maurice the Morris Dancer at my wedding? I remember seeing it like whenever there was such a good act, will you do it at my wedding? And then I did the Upper Class Rapper on the Free Fringe a couple of years ago and ran into Mr. Gentleman B, the Gentleman Rhyme, or whatever his name is, producer, who accused me of nicking the Gentleman Rhymer's act. And there was this standoff in the pub. I was like, fucking hell, I did it 10 years before your guy, in this very room.
Yeah.
And anyway, so...
Well, no, that was... You could have had a rap-off.
We should have done. I've always wanted to challenge him to a duel, but I've never got around to it.
Yeah, you could have...
He's good. He's more... Like, he's a former rapper. He's had, like, #1 singles as a rapper.
Oh, really?
And he's, like, much better musically than I could ever dream about being.
Yeah.
So he's come to it from a musical background, and I came to it from a comedian.
I think your route, I prefer you. It's far funnier. I've seen him. He's musically very good, but I don't find him as funny because he's so. It's that whimsy that he does. I think it's gentle, it's nice, but
mine was gags.
Yours was just. It was fun.
Do you know what's the weird thing about the rapper is I did it from '97 to '99, and in my head, the internet started in 2000.
Yeah.
That's kind of the year that everyone got a computer and everyone started doing shit online. And that's like the year that like Chortle, you know. And so there's absolutely no evidence online anywhere of the rapper. It's weird. It's like it's a weird era in history from about 95 to about 99. Weird era in comedic history that's just been kind of wiped away.
Because cameras were video cameras were still like massive.
They weren't. We didn't have them.
You couldn't buy them for like 50 quid, or they weren't on your phone. It was a different. I do remember it was very difficult to see yourself. So, and listen, we're at the Edinburgh Festival today, and I've seen you. So we're, to come full circle now, we're so there's a little bit of the stand-up in you today in your show. You're comparing. But it's a sort of game show, but it's very much about money. How did you then, and you have like an interest in bitcoins, and you seem to know an awful lot about, you've written quite a book on the Bitcoin revolution. How did that all start in your whole interest in? Well, I think
again, we're in about 2005, 2006, and I'd earned a bit of money doing my voiceovers, and and I got divorced, and anyone who gets divorced finds there's just suddenly space in their life because they're not with their family all the time. I had my kids. I had a good divorce settlement. I had my kids 2 or 3 days a week, but there were 4 days, and voiceovers is not a full-time job. 4 days a week, I just had time on my hands, and the comparing and the comedy, I'd do like 2 or 3 gigs a week at the time, and I never really wanted to do that much more because I hate driving at night, and so I just had time and I had a bit of money and I wanted to invest it, and I started reading, and I started reading about gold, and gold's a very political metal because gold used to be money once upon a time, and I thought, this makes sense, gold makes sense as an investment, and I started investing in gold, and it did very well. But because gold and money and politics is all related, I started reading more and more, and then there were all these interesting people talking about it, and I wanted to meet them, and so I did exactly what you're doing, is I started a podcast as a device to meet these people.
Wow. And when was this? What year?
2006.
2006.
And the podcast became really popular because I was asking rookie questions.
Yeah.
And it was all in a language, because I was a comedian, the comedy forces you to be clear.
Yeah.
Because if the audience doesn't understand what you're saying, you die.
And what was the name of the podcast?
At the time it was called Commodity Watch Radio.
Wow.
But
and
now
this is
it's
way before podcasting was
Yeah.
popular.
In 2006, because Commodity Watch Radio was so successful, I started another podcast called Comedians Talking, where I used to interview comedians, because I always thought comedians are much more interesting talking about stuff than they are doing their actual acts.
Yeah.
And I did it for about a year, and then I just, like all this, I got bored and stopped doing it, and then suddenly we had all the 2 or 3 years later, we had the booming podcast. So I was ahead of it. Always ahead of it.
Always ahead of the
Always
game.
ahead of it.
I'm going to hang around you a lot more to see if I can.
But anyway, yeah, and so I started this podcast, and I met more and more people, and then one of the people I interviewed was a lady called Merrin Somerset Webb, who's the editor of Money Week. She asked me to start writing a column for Money Week, so I started writing a column for Money Week, and stuff used to spiral. And by about 2007, it was obvious to me, that there was too much debt in the world and there was about to be a financial crisis.
Right. Okay.
So I actually sold my house and put all the money into gold. And, I was right. There was a financial crisis. And all these economists, mainstream economists and all the rest of it, who missed it. I'm like, I was a fucking comedian. And I just started reading shit on the internet, and it was obvious to me that it was coming. How could you miss this?
You and Vince Cable, just the two of you.
Well, I'm not. Vince Cable's a bit of a chameleon, and he's a bit of a revisionist. So I'm not entirely sure Vince Cable predicted.
He apparently was I don't know how true this is. He had made a speech about the
he did.
looming prospect, but you were convinced.
Well, I put my money where my mouth
You
is.
did.
Vince Cable didn't sell his house and buy gold.
And you did, and it there you go. It
Paid off for a bit.
It paid off, and so and then bitcoins. How did that then?
Well, gold,
again,
because
spotted a
when
trend.
I wrote Life After the State, which is a book I wrote in 2012, 2013. This was a big book of political philosophy. It was basically the result of the 5 years' work that I'd done. And my conclusion that if we were to save the world and change the world, we needed to change our system of money.
Yeah.
And while I was writing it, I discovered this new system of money that had been invented, Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And I didn't invest as much money as I should have done in it early. And I sort of I then thought, well, if I've written Life, I said the next logical book to write about is Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So I kind of wrote the book about Bitcoin as a kind of catch-up trade for the fact that I hadn't invested in it as early as I should.
And so it just and is it done very well, that book? Is it?
It's done pretty well.
Yeah.
Where it's done well, I would advise anyone who's thinking of writing a book to write a book, because a book is like a calling card, and you've got a concrete thing that's the distillation of a few years of your life.
Sure.
Where that book's done me very well is you don't earn any money writing books unless you're J.K. Rowling. But what that book's done is it's made me a spokesperson for Bitcoin. I've got to go and do talks all around the world.
Okay, so you go,
Yeah.
and just a bit of a shout out, is available on Amazon
yeah.
and it can be there. That's fine. And so you've used this as part of the show today.
It's like a card, yeah.
It's a bit of a calling card there, and some of the gifts, the prizes that can be
Yeah,
won.
I give out Bitcoin cash.
You give Bitcoin.
That's as a result of the book.
And that's the result.
And in fact, the 500 quid I give out in the show is as a result of
and
the book.
that's their sponsorship. So it's like, and I was explaining it to a comedian that I phoned, just saying, "Oh, what are you doing?" I said, "I've been to. He's giving away £500 every day." He goes, "Oh, well, he must be in bitcoins or what?" I said, "No, actual cash. He's doing it. I saw it happen."
Yeah.
And he didn't believe it. But as you were saying, when you're flyering your show and you said there's £500, people just don't believe it. They don't believe it. So that's the attitude. So listen. Thank you very much for coming on
My
the
pleasure.
podcast today. I think I've got to do a revisit someday because it's great.
Do you live in London?
I live in Manchester, but I do
Okay.
a lot on Skype and I can catch.
Okay.
But
Well, I'm on Skype.
one final question that is part to do with the podcast, as I always ask, who do you think I should interview for a future episode of Funny Peculiar that would be a good interview? Character comedian, someone a bit or anybody you want. And I'm slightly putting you on the spot here because I didn't mention it at the beginning.
No, it's fine.
So
I'm going to suggest a few names.
You go for
as
it.
I go through names, I'm going to arrive at the person I think you should
That's
interview.
fine. That's fine.
I really like what Milo McCabe's doing.
Yes.
Have you interviewed him?
Troy Hawke.
Hawke.
I'm scheduled to catch up with
Okay.
him. So
I don't watch that many character acts. But when I seen Milo, I really like what he does. Count Arthur Strong, I loved. I presume you've interviewed him at some stage.
No, I will track him down.
He's probably Jade the folk singer. Do you remember Jade the folk singer?
That rings a bell. Who did that?
She was funny, man. I don't know what happened to her. I think she was Aussie comic.
Yeah, right.
She
Okay,
was
so
funny.
there was a few out there. So
Good characters are rare, man. They're rare. Al Murray's the king. See, Al Murray's used the pub land. If you looked at the pub lander from the point of view of a character actor, you go, well, Al doesn't change. He changes his accent a little bit, and that's about it. And he comes out of character all the time. But as a stand-up device, I mean, that act was for 5 years. That was the best act in the world.
It was just it was just the way that it's this solid, constant. It's a motor sort of experience that he goes through. So, and he could do noises as well with his mouth. He did sound.
That's
effects.
the other thing. I'm a soft spot. I've got a soft spot for noises.
Oh, really?
Stefano Paolini, brilliant.
Ah, yes, he does a lot of and now he's from the circuit from quite a few years ago. So I'll try and track one of those down. Dominic, thank you very much for your time today. Good luck with the show. In Edinburgh now, go and see Dominic's show, and also you can check out website Dominic Frisby, what's your web.com, and all the books. But I'll put all your bio information.
I'll tell you what, I mean, DominicFrisby.com is about 5 years old. You're probably doing better off doing like at Dominic Frisby on Twitter if you do all that stuff.
And Facebook,
Dominic Frisby.
You do that.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for coming on the show. Cheers, Dominic.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to Funny Peculiar. Tune in next week. More great guests.
So a big thank you again to Dominic Frisby for giving me his time. It was a great interview. Again, it was just announced then, but you can catch up with Dominic at Dominic Frisby, and it's the same for his Twitter, Facebook, and you can get dominicfrisby.com. So a big thank you, and remember that was recorded in 2018 August. So anytime after that, there's no Edinburgh Festival. But anyway, thanks for listening. Keep subscribing, keep downloading. Let us know your comments, who your favourite episode is, and we'll see you next week with more Funny Peculiar interviews on Funny Peculiar Podcast.